Foreshadowing is a plot device in which a writer or filmmaker gives an advance hint of what's to happen later on in the story, with the term being a play on the concept of a shadow appearing before an object. Now, remember that because I'm not so subtly foreshadowing what our last entry in this video will be. Anyway, a number of TV shows use this device to brilliant effect, so we thought that we'd take a look at 10 or so of the best uses of foreshadowing in television that you might have missed.
How do you know all that?
So, let's get started. But before we do, this video will have a number of heavy spoilers for multiple TV shows, so make sure you check the chapters so you don't have a particular show you want to watch spoiled for you. It's been nearly a decade since it ended, but we're still talking about the masterpiece that is Breaking Bad, as it is easily one of the best, if not the best, shows of all time. Amongst wonderful character arcs, suggestive imagery, and hidden Easter eggs, Breaking Bad is rife with foreshadowing, and to go over every piece would require its own separate video, but we'll do our best to fire through some here. In the very first episode, just after his 50th birthday, Walt is told that he has 2 years to live after his cancer diagnosis. Now, this turns out to be accurate, though it wasn't actually the cancer that got him, but a gunfight with Jack and his gang a few days after his 52nd birthday. Speaking of deaths, the circumstances of Jane's shocking death was hinted at throughout the season. The first one is when Marie rolls baby Holly on her side for safety, something Walt overlooked, with the second being when Jane warns Jesse against lying on his back for fear of him choking on his own vomit. The death of Jane subsequently leads to the horrific plane crash that takes place over Albuquerque, and this is teased throughout the season with the pink bear in Walt's pool. However, if you were to look at the episode titles of all the episodes with these flash forwards, you would notice that they read 737 down over ABQ, which is a blatant reference to the plane crash. Now, Breaking Bad may be the GOAT of television, but Succession is getting closer and closer to stealing its crown, and I am seriously obsessed with the show. Season 3 ended in dramatic fashion, with Tom betraying Shiv and warning Logan about the Roy children's plan to use the supermajority clause to prevent Logan from selling the company out from underneath them. While this was shocking, there were hints that this might happen throughout the run of the show. While Logan started off not being one of Tom's greatest fans, telling Shiv that he was beneath her, he has warmed to Tom throughout its run. But Logan really started to warm to Tom when he proved his loyalty by saying that he would go to prison for him if it came down to it. In that moment, Logan pats Tom on the back, just like he does in the final episode to hint at Tom's betrayal. We also see Tom and Logan's relationship grow stronger when Logan has his UTI and goes piss mad and calls Tom son. But we also see Tom's true allegiances to Logan throughout the show, such as the moment that he tells Kendall that he's never seen Logan get f***ed. Whoops, I shouldn't have said that part. They're gonna bleep it out. Oh, they'll bleep it out, it'll be fine. The Nero and Sporus story Tom tells Greg also essentially foreshadows their allegiance and relationship at the very end of the season. Kendall's near drowning is also foreshadowed by the water imagery, such as him rising out of the water at the beginning of Season 2, his near death in a bog at the end of Season 1, his panic attack in a bath, and the fact that his name is a reference to a river. Game of Thrones is another show rife with backstabbing, betrayal, and of course, foreshadowing, because it wouldn't be in the video otherwise. One of the best instances of foreshadowing in Game of Thrones is when in Season 4, Littlefinger tells Robb and Aaron people die at their dinner tables. They die in their beds. They die squatting over their chamber pots. Everybody dies sooner or later. Which essentially details all of the major deaths in that season, as Joffrey dies after being poisoned at a dinner table, Tyrion kills Shay in bed, and then kills Tywin when he's on a chamber pot. Other great elements of foreshadowing is the moment where the Starks find a stag and a direwolf head at the side of the road in the very first episode, both of which are sigils for House Baratheon and Stark respectively. Of course, by the end of the season, both Robert Baratheon and Ned Stark find themselves dead, and just like the direwolf pups, the Starks find themselves without a parent. Another moment of foreshadowing, among many, but again, I don't have that much time, is Walder Frey's pie, which consists of his own children and was served to him by a vengeful Arya. This is foreshadowed early on, with Bran's eerie fireside story where he talks about the Night Watch's cook who was angry with the king and ended up killing his son and baking him into a pie before feeding it to the king. As punishment, the cook was then transformed into a giant rat who only wanted to eat his own young. The reason for this being that he killed a guest beneath his roof, which is something the gods can't forgive. I can't believe it. We just got through this whole entry without even mentioning Hold the Door. Squid Game took the world by storm in 2021, and while we have already covered the use of foreshadowing in that show on this channel, we're going to go over it once again. While the games are kept a secret to the players, if you look closely, you'll notice that every game scene in the show is represented in mural form on the wall of the dorm room. Oh Il-nam's true identity as the game's puppet master is hinted at multiple times, with him being missing from the player files, the fact that he isn't picked up by the creepy robot girl during red light green light, the moment that the riots come to an end because he begged them to stop, the fact that his name translates to number 1 man and he has 001 on his jacket before giving it to Song Gi-hun, who ended up winning, and the fact that the neighborhood during the marble game looks so much like the one he grew up in. Also, the deaths of many major characters are hinted at in episode 2, with Kang Se-byok threatening to cut a man's throat, and she ends up dying after having her throat cut, and Jung Deok-soo dies after falling from the bridge, which mirrors the moment he jumps from a bridge to escape some gangsters. One of the most infamous scenes from The Walking Dead is the moment where Negan kills Glenn by bashing his head in with a baseball bat. The victim of Negan's killing was initially a cliffhanger, but there were hints that it would be Glenn leading up to the traumatic scene. During Season 5, Glenn picks up a baseball bat multiple times in the Alexandria safe zone while he was almost killed by one at Terminus in the very beginning of the season. It is easy to get lost in the enigma that is the show Lost, and while it started off strong, many believe that it lost its way with it seemingly making it up as it went along. However, the showrunners see it a little differently, using a piece of foreshadowing in the pilot as their prime example. In the second half of the pilot, when talking about backgammon, Locke says to Walt, 2 players, 2 sides. One is light, one is dark. But it basically summed up the whole series and the rivalry between Jacob and the Man in Black. In regards to that line, co-creator Damon Lindelof said, "We did know that when Locke referred to the black and the white, that ultimately that concept was going to be personified by 2 individuals." The first season of HBO's True Detective is another great example of subtle foreshadowing and ominous hints. As detectives Rust Cole and Marty Hart try to hunt down the Yellow King, as they find themselves on the right track, we see the recurring use of the color yellow. But the best piece of foreshadowing is easily the moment when Rust and Marty visit the light of the way and end up unknowingly face to face with the Yellow King on the lawnmower. While the 2 of them were unaware, there was a clue given to the audience as to who the guy was, and if you notice in the sign shown in the tracking shot, part of the school closed sentence reads, "Notice King." Now, while it may have had a divisive ending, at its peak, How I Met Your Mother was one of the best sitcoms around. One of the greatest mysteries was the identity of the mother, but her name was actually revealed early on in Season 1.
That's it.
That's it.
When Ted meets a stripper whose stage name is Amber, she then reveals her real name is Tracy, with Ted then saying that's how he met his kid's mother. The kids freak out until Ted tells them it was a joke, but the reason they reacted in that way is the fact that the mother's name was Tracy McConnell, as we later find out. Arrested Development is another comedy which uses hilarious foreshadowing, and while there are a number of moments we could reference, we're going to focus on all the hints that Buster would lose his hand. In Season 2, Episode 3, when Buster sees his lost hand-shaped chair, he says,
"Oh, I never thought I'd miss a hand so much."
In Season 2, Episode 1, in the background is a news broadcast discussing a seal attack, with the line, "Meet one surprised bather" coming up being heard. Just after this, the camera shows Buster. In Season 2, Episode 11, a seal can be seen in the background during Buster and Lucille's beach photo shoot, while later on in the episode, George Sr. says, "What if I never get a chance to reach out and touch that hand of his again?" But the best hint in the episode is when Buster sits on a bench near the beach, and his position crops the words on the back of the bench to say, "Arm off." Now, while many were shocked about Chandler and Monica's friendship and friends, there was actually a hint to their future romance early on.
This is gonna sound, a little, hasty.
In the scene where Monica, Phoebe, and Rachel are wearing wedding dresses, Monica catches the bouquet and yells, "I'm getting married next!" And sure enough, she is the one that gets married next. But that's not all, as later on in the scene, when Chandler comes over, Monica yells that they can't let him see them like this, with Phoebe then joking, "Yeah, the groom cannot see the bride." And of course, who does Monica marry? I mean, could it be any more foreshadowed? Now, going back to that not-so-subtle foreshadowing reference at the start of the video, Futurama took foreshadowing to a whole new meta level by placing a blink-and-you'll-miss-it shadow of Nibbler in the pilot episode just before Fry is frozen. As we find out later in Season 4, Nibbler was the one responsible for Fry being frozen, and this plot point is beautifully teased in the very first episode.